They say you never truly know a man until you clean out his pockets after he's gone. I thought I knew my husband, Thaddeus. I thought I was his whole world. For 45 years, I was the perfect wife. And yesterday, I stood by his casket in the pouring rain, weeping for a saint. Everyone told me, Eudora, you were so lucky, and I believed them. But grief keeps you awake. So, late last night, I opened his favorite Bible looking for comfort. I didn't find a prayer. I found a receipt. It was a bank transfer slip, dated 3 weeks ago, $8,500 sent to a place called Red Rock Sanctuary in Arizona. My heart stopped. You see, 3 weeks ago, my husband was in a coma. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. So, how did a dying man send money across the country? That little slip of paper wasn't just a receipt. It was a breadcrumb. And when I followed it, I didn't just find a secret. I found a war. Thaddeus thought his secrets died with him. He was wrong. The rain in Newport doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the old stones slippery and the ocean gray. Standing there by the grave, I felt the water seeping through my shoes, chilling me to the bone. But I didn't move. I couldn't. It felt like my feet were nailed to the wet grass. 45 years. That is how long I had been Mrs. Thaddeus Sterling. I wasn't just his wife. I was his shadow, his secretary, his nurse, and his keeper. And as they lowered that mahogany box into the ground, I felt like they were burying me along with him. The priest was talking about Thaddeus like he was a candidate for sainthood. He spoke of Thaddeus's charity, his devotion to the church, and his kindness to strangers. I looked around at the sea of black umbrellas. There were senators, business tycoons, and people I didn't even know, all nodding their heads. They were mourning a titan of real estate. I was mourning the man who used to warm my cold feet on winter nights. My son, Caspian, stood next to me. He is a good man, 40 years old but still looking like a boy in an ill-fitting suit. He squeezed my arm, a little too hard. "It's almost over, Mom," he whispered. "Just hold it together a little longer. For Dad. For Dad. Everything was always for Dad." The reception back at the estate was a blur of hushed voices and clinking silverware. People came up to me, one by one, offering the same tired words. "He's in a better place, Eudora. You were so lucky to have him. What will you do now?" That last question terrified me. What would I do? I was 72 years old. I had never balanced a checkbook. I had never booked a flight. Thaddeus handled the world. I just lived in it. I felt small, like a piece of furniture that had lost its purpose. By 8 o'clock, the last guest had left. The house, usually so full of Thaddeus's booming voice, was silent. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against my ears. Caspian kissed my forehead. "Go to bed, Mom. I'll handle the lawyers in the morning. You just rest. You've earned a long rest." He meant well, but it sounded like he was putting me out to pasture. He saw a fragile old woman who needed to be managed. He didn't see his mother. I walked up the grand staircase, my hand trailing along the banister. I couldn't go to our bedroom. The empty side of the bed was too much to face tonight. Instead, I wandered down the hall to Thaddeus's study. The room still smelled like him, a mix of old paper, leather, and the peppermint candies he always kept in a crystal bowl. I sat in his big leather chair. It swallowed me whole. I wanted to feel close to him one last time. I reached for his Bible. It was sitting right in the center of the desk, worn at the edges. Thaddeus was a devout man. He read a chapter every single night before bed, without fail. He used to say it was the only way to keep his moral compass pointing north in a business full of sharks. I pulled the heavy book onto my lap. I just wanted to read the passage he had bookmarked last. I needed to know what was on his mind before the stroke took his voice away 2 months ago. I opened the cover. The pages were thin, like onion skin. As I turned past the book of Psalms, something fluttered out. It wasn't a bookmark. It was a small, white slip of paper. I picked it up. It was a thermal receipt from a bank transfer. My eyes were tired, so I had to squint to read the faint black ink. Transfer amount, $8,500. Recipient, Red Rock Sanctuary, LLC. Location, Sedona, Arizona. I frowned. Arizona? We didn't know anyone in Arizona. Thaddeus hated the desert. He said the dry air ruined his sinuses. Maybe it was a donation? Thaddeus was always donating to charities he didn't tell me about. He liked to be the silent benefactor. But then my eyes drifted down to the date at the bottom of the slip. My breath hitched in my throat. The date was October 14th. I read it again. Sure, I was making a mistake. October 14th. My hands started to tremble, shaking the paper. October 14th was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, Thaddeus was in the hospice wing of the hospital. He had been in a coma. The doctors said his brain activity was minimal. He couldn't lift a finger, let alone drive to a bank or authorize a wire transfer. I sat there, the receipt fluttering in my shaking hand. A cold knot formed in my stomach, tighter and colder than the grief. If Thaddeus was in a coma, who sent this money? I looked at the desk. The ledger, the big green book where Thaddeus recorded every single penny that came in and went out. He was obsessive about it. A man who doesn't know his numbers, doesn't know his life, he used to say. I had never opened that book. It was forbidden territory. But tonight, the rules were buried 6 feet under. I pulled the ledger toward me and flipped to the recent entries. My finger traced down the lines of neat, handwritten numbers. September, August, July. There it was. Red Rock Sanctuary, $8,500. I went back another month. Red Rock Sanctuary, $8,500. I flipped back a year. 5 years, 10 years. The pages rustled loudly in the quiet room. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a one-time donation. This was a payroll. Every single month, for as far back as the book went, Thaddeus had been sending money to this place in Arizona. I did the math in my head, the numbers swirling. Over 30 years, that was millions of dollars. Millions. Gone. I stared at the empty chair across the room, imagining Thaddeus sitting there. The man who checked the grocery bill to make sure we weren't charged for an extra apple. The man who told me we couldn't afford to fix the greenhouse last year because money was tight. He had been lying, not just once. He had been lying every day for 30 years. Who was Red Rock Sanctuary? And why was my dying husband paying them a fortune? I looked at the receipt again. The timestamp said 2:15 p.m. On October 14th at 2:15 p.m., I was sitting by Thaddeus's bedside holding his hand. He didn't move. He didn't speak. Someone else made that transfer. Or Thaddeus wasn't as sick as he pretended to be. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. I slammed the ledger shut and shoved the receipt into the pocket of my cardigan. My heart hammered in my throat. For the first time in 45 years, I felt unsafe in my own home. I wasn't a widow mourning a saint anymore. I was a woman standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into a dark, deep secret. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I had to jump. The floorboard creaked again, louder this time. I froze, my hand hovering over the heavy green ledger. The door to the study swung open, and the hallway light cut a sharp yellow wedge across the dark Persian rug. Mom? It was Caspian. He was still in his funeral suit, his tie loosened, looking exhausted and annoyed. He rubbed his eyes, squinting at me, sitting behind his father's massive desk. "What are you doing in here?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, but it had that edge to it, the tone you use with a toddler who has wandered out of bed. "It's past midnight. You need to sleep." I didn't move. I couldn't just close the book and pretend nothing had happened. The numbers were burned into my retinas. "I couldn't sleep, Caspian. I was looking through your father's things." Caspian sighed, a long, heavy sound that filled the room. He walked over and gently tried to pull the ledger away from me. "You don't need to worry about the accounts, Mom. That's all complicated stuff. The lawyers and I are handling the estate. You don't have to burden yourself." He was treating me like I was fragile, like my brain had shut down just because my husband's heart had. "I'm not burdened, Caspian. I'm confused." I held my hand down on the page, refusing to let him close it. "Look at this." I pointed to the column of payments. "Red Rock Sanctuary." Caspian glanced at it, barely focusing. "It's a charity, Mom. Dad supported dozens of charities, churches, orphanages, animal shelters. He was a generous man. We knew that. Every month, I pushed. $8,500? For 30 years? Caspian, that's over $3 million. We didn't fix the roof last winter because Thaddeus said we didn't have the liquidity. He made me fire the gardener. He made us live on a budget while he was sending a fortune to the desert. Caspian stiffened. He finally looked at the page. I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, but he crushed it instantly. He stood up straight, pulling his shoulders back, trying to look like the man of the house now. "There is an explanation," he said firmly. "There is always an explanation. Maybe it was an investment. Maybe it's a trust for us that he wanted to keep a surprise. You're reading too much into it because you're grieving. And this?" I pulled the crumbled receipt from my pocket and slapped it onto the mahogany. October 14th. 3 weeks ago, Dad was in a coma, Caspian. Who authorized this transfer? Caspian picked up the receipt. He stared at it for a long time. The silence in the room stretched thin, like a rubber band about to snap. Then, he crumpled it up and tossed it into the wastebasket. "It's a glitch, Mom," he said, his voice rising. "Bank errors happen. Auto payments malfunction. I will call the bank on Monday and sort it out. But you need to stop." "Stop?" I whispered. "Yes, stop digging," he said, leaning over the desk, his face close to mine. "Dad is gone. His legacy is all we have left. If you go stirring up trouble, asking questions, making accusations, you tarnish him. Do you want people to think he was hiding something? Do you want the papers to sniff around?" I looked at my son. I looked for the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. I didn't see him. I saw a man terrified of losing his status. He didn't care about the truth. He cared about the Sterling name. He cared about the inheritance. He was protecting the dead man, not the living woman sitting right in front of him. "You're right," I lied. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. "I'm just tired. My mind is playing tricks on me." Caspian's shoulders dropped. He looked relieved. He came around the desk and kissed the top of my head. "Exactly. You've been through hell, Mom. Listen, why don't you take a trip? Go to that spa in Connecticut you like, the one with the mineral pools. Spend a week there. Get a massage. Just disconnect. I'll handle the house. I'll handle the business." "That sounds lovely," I said softly. "A few days away, just to clear my head." "Good," he smiled, looking satisfied that he had managed the problem. "Go to sleep. I'll book the car to take you on Monday." He turned off the desk lamp, plunging me into semi-darkness, and walked out of the room. He closed the door with a solid click. I sat there in the dark for a full minute, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. He thought I was weak. He thought I was senile. He thought he could pat me on the head and send me off to soak in a hot tub while he buried his father's secrets along with the body. Slowly, I reached into the wastebasket. I fished out the crumpled ball of paper. I smoothed it out on the desk, pressing the wrinkles flat with my palm. I wasn't going to Connecticut. I stood up, my knees creaking, but my spine felt stiffer than it had in years. I walked over to the wall, safe hidden behind the portrait of Thaddeus's grandfather. I knew the combination. It was Caspian's birthday. Thaddeus was sentimental about numbers, if nothing else. Inside, there was a stack of emergency cash. I took it all. I couldn't use my credit cards. Caspian would see the charges. If I was going to do this, I had to be a ghost. I went back to my bedroom and pulled my old floral suitcase from the closet. I didn't pack spa robes or swimsuits. I packed my comfortable walking shoes, my reading glasses, and a map of the Southwest I found in the library. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the phone. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady when I dialed the airline's automated line. "Destination?" the robotic voice asked. "Phoenix," I said clearly. "One way or round trip?" I paused. I looked at the empty pillow beside me. I looked at the photos of our happy life on the dresser. If what I suspected was true, there was no home to come back to. "One way," I said. Caspian wanted me to disconnect. He wanted me to rest. But as I snapped the locks on my suitcase, I realized I was done resting. For the first time in my life, I was waking up. The heat in Arizona didn't just feel hot, it felt angry. When I stepped out of the Phoenix airport, the air hit me like the blast from an open oven. I was wearing my navy wool travel blazer and sensible pearls, the uniform of a Newport socialite. Here, amidst the tourists in tank tops and cowboy boots, I looked like a relic from another century. I rented a car. It was a small white sedan that smelled like stale lemon cleaner. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I hadn't driven on a highway in 15 years. Thaddeus always drove. Or Caspian drove. Or the hired driver drove. Eudora doesn't have the nerves for traffic, Thaddeus used to say. I guess I had to find my nerves now. The drive north to Sedona took 2 hours. As I left the city behind, the landscape changed. The gray concrete turned into vast, open desert, and then, suddenly, the earth turned blood red. Giant towers of stone rose up against the blue sky, beautiful but intimidating. They looked like ancient fortress walls. I felt very small and very far from home. The GPS on my phone chirped, telling me to turn left onto a private road. I expected Red Rock Sanctuary to be a clinic, maybe a holistic care center for the elderly. I had played out the scenario in my head 1,000 times. Thaddeus was paying for a secret child who was sick, or maybe an old friend who had fallen on hard times. I was ready to be compassionate. I was ready to forgive his charity. But the road wasn't a dusty trail to a clinic. It was freshly paved, smooth black asphalt winding through the scrub brush. I rounded the final bend, and my foot slammed onto the brake. It wasn't a clinic. It wasn't a shack. It was a palace. The house was a sprawling masterpiece of adobe and glass, blended perfectly into the red cliffside. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the sunset. There was a shimmering infinity pool that seemed to drop off the edge of the world. A silver Land Rover was parked in the circular driveway. This place made our drafty, 100-year-old mansion in Newport look like a museum. This was modern. This was expensive. This was alive. I sat in my idling rental car, staring up at the house. The numbers from the ledger swam in my head. $3 million. I realized with a sick feeling that I wasn't looking at a charity case. I was looking at my husband's money. I was looking at the roof we didn't fix. I was looking at the vacations we didn't take. I turned off the engine. The silence of the desert was immediate and overwhelming. The only sound was the blood rushing in my ears. I stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched loudly under my sensible shoes. I walked toward the heavy wooden front door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a fist. Before I could knock, the door opened. A woman stepped out onto the porch. She was tall, with silver hair cut short and sharp. She wore linen trousers and a loose silk shirt that looked effortless and expensive. She didn't look like the soft, powdery ladies at my garden club. She looked like she was carved out of the red rock itself, tough, weathered, and unbreakable. She didn't smile. She didn't look surprised to see a stranger in her driveway. She leaned against the doorframe, crossed her arms, and looked me up and down with eyes that were piercingly blue. "You're late," she said. Her voice was like sandpaper, rough and dry. "I expected you 3 days ago." I blinked, caught off guard. You know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, Eudora," she said. She took a drag from a thin cigarette I hadn't noticed she was holding. That's when the sunlight caught it. Around her neck, resting against her tanned skin, was a diamond pendant. It was a solitaire diamond, shaped like a tear. I gasped, my hand flying to my own throat. For our 40th anniversary, Thaddeus had given me a diamond teardrop necklace. He told me it was custom-made, one of a kind, designed just for me. I had worn it to the funeral yesterday. But the diamond around this woman's neck was twice the size of mine. She saw me looking at it. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. She didn't cover it up. She touched the stone possessively. "Nice, isn't it?" she drawled. Thaddeus always did have good taste. Although, he usually bought the discount version for the East Coast. The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. She wasn't a charity case. She wasn't a friend. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She flicked her cigarette ash onto the pristine porch steps. "My name is Lorraine," she said, "and you're standing in my driveway." "Lorraine?" I repeated the name. It tasted foreign on my tongue. I had never heard Thaddeus mention a Lorraine. Not in his sleep, not in his stories, not in 45 years. "You're staring at me like I'm a ghost," she said, crushing her cigarette out with the heel of her expensive leather boot. "I assure you, I'm very real, more real than you probably." I straightened my back. I was trembling, but I refused to let her see it. I remembered who I was. I was Eudora Sterling. I had hosted senators. I had run charity galas. I would not be intimidated by a woman in the desert, no matter how big her diamond was. "My husband has been sending money here," I said, my voice steady. "Millions of dollars. I want to know why. Was he Was he paying you for something? Blackmail? Lorraine threw her head back and laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound, like a coyote barking. Blackmail? She wheezed, wiping a tear from her eye. Oh, that's rich. You think I extorted him? Honey, Thaddeus gave me that money because he wanted to. He built this house because he hated that drafty old museum you call a home in Newport. He wanted a place where he could breathe. She walked down the steps, moving with a predator's grace, until she was standing right in front of me. She smelled of expensive perfume and stale smoke. He didn't love the desert, I argued, feeling desperate. He had allergies. He hated the heat. He hated the heat with you, Lorraine corrected. With me, he loved the sunsets. He loved the silence. He loved that I didn't make him wear a tie to dinner or listen to gossip about the neighbors. She poked a manicured finger at the pearl brooch on my lapel. Look at you, she sneered. Perfect hair, perfect clothes. You look exactly like he described. The Newport ornament. The words hit me like a physical slap. Excuse me? That's what he called you, she said, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper. His ornament. Pretty to look at. Good for public appearances. Kept on the shelf when not in use. But nobody has a deep conversation with an ornament, Eudora. Nobody loves an ornament. I felt tears pricking my eyes, hot and stinging. I wanted to turn around, get back in my rental car, and drive until the gas ran out. But I couldn't. The anger was starting to burn through the shame. Thaddeus loved me, I said, though my voice sounded small in the vast desert air. He was a good man. He was a man, Lorraine said, shrugging. And he was a liar. But you already know that. That's why you're here. She turned her back on me and walked toward the massive front door. It was made of dark, heavy wood, like the gate to a fortress. You can leave if you want, she called out over her shoulder. You can drive back to Phoenix, fly home, and pretend this never happened. You can keep playing the grieving widow. She paused, her hand on the latch. Or, she said, you can come inside. I have something in my safe that belongs to you. Well, it concerns you. But I have to warn you, Eudora. If you walk through this door, you won't like what you find. The Eudora who walks in won't be the same one who walks out. I looked at the car. Safety, ignorance. I looked at the open door. Pain, truth. I thought about the receipt in my pocket. I thought about the lies in the ledger. I thought about Caspian telling me to go to a spa. I took a deep breath of the dry, dusty air. Show me, I said. Lorraine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Don't say I didn't warn you. She pushed the door open, and I stepped out of the bright Arizona sun and into the shadows of the house. The inside of the house was like a refrigerator, cold, sterile, and smelling faintly of lemon and expensive leather. I hugged my cardigan tighter around myself. The furniture was all sharp angles and white fabric. There were no family photos on the walls, no knickknacks, no clutter. It was the complete opposite of our home in Newport, which was filled with 45 years of memories. Drink? Lorraine asked, walking over to a wet bar made of black marble. She didn't wait for an answer. She poured herself a glass of amber liquid bourbon, neat. Thaddeus's drink. I don't drink, I said stiffly. Suit yourself, she said, taking a long sip. You're going to need something to steady your nerves, though. She walked over to a large abstract painting on the far wall. With a casual flick of her wrist, she swung the painting aside. Behind it was a steel wall safe. My stomach turned over. Thaddeus had a safe just like that in his study. He told me it was for business contracts. I realized now how many things he told me were just stories. Lorraine punched in a code. Beep, 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 click. She reached in and pulled out a single, yellowed envelope. She tossed it onto the glass coffee table between us. It landed with a heavy slap. Open it, she said. I stared at the envelope. My hands felt numb as I reached for it. I undid the clasp and slid the document out. It was an official certificate. The paper was old, the edges soft. Certificate of marriage. State of Nevada. Groom. Thaddeus William Sterling. Bride. Lorena Marie Vance. Date. Le 14 juin 1978. I read the date 3 times. 1978. This is a mistake, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. I married Thaddeus in 1981, 3 years later. Do you see a divorce stamp on that paper? Lorene asked, sitting down on the white sofa and crossing her long legs. I flipped the paper over. I looked at the corners. Nothing. We got married in Vegas, Lorene said, swirling her drink. We were young, stupid, and broke. We had a fight a year later, and he left to go east. He wanted to become a big shot in real estate. He told me he'd send for me when he made his first million. She took another sip. He never sent for me. Instead, he met you. The debutante with the family connections and the inheritance. You were the ladder he needed to climb, Eudora. So he climbed you. But he married me. I insisted, tears finally spilling onto my cheeks. We had a wedding, a church, a priest. He had a ceremony, Lorene corrected. But legally? In the eyes of the state? He was already married. To me. She leaned forward, her blue eyes locking onto mine. That makes your marriage void, Eudora. It never happened. You weren't his wife. You were his mistress for 45 years. And you didn't even know it. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling off the sofa. I wasn't a widow. I was nothing. The children, the house, the life, it was all built on a foundation of sand. Why? I choked out. Why did he pay you? Because I found him, she said simply. 30 years ago, I tracked him down. I saw his picture in a magazine. Real estate tycoon Eudora Sterling. I called him. I told him I was coming to Newport to say hello to his new bride. She laughed darkly. He panicked. He begged me to stay away. He said if I stayed quiet, if I stayed in Arizona, he would take care of me. He promised that he would build me a castle, and that when he died, I would get my share. Your share? I looked at the luxury around me. You have millions. Isn't this enough? Lorene stood up. She walked over to the window, looking out at the red rocks. Thaddeus didn't leave a will, did he? She asked softly. I shook my head. No, he was superstitious. He thought writing a will invited death. But the law says the spouse inherits everything. Lorene turned around, and her smile was terrifying. Exactly, she said. The spouse inherits everything, and I am the spouse. I felt the blood drain from my face. You can't mean. I've already spoken to my lawyers, Lorene said, her voice hard as granite. Since your marriage is void, you have no claim to the Sterling estate. The house in Newport? It's mine. The investments? Mine. The life insurance policy you're trying to cash? Mine. She walked back to the table and picked up the marriage certificate, sliding it back into the envelope. I'm doing you a favor, Eudora, she said. I'm giving you a head start. Go back home, pack your things, take your clothes, your trinkets, whatever fits in your car. But leave the furniture, the art, and the keys. You can't do that, I whispered. That is my home. It's my asset, she countered, and I'm listing it for sale next week. She checked her watch, dismissing me. You have until Monday, Eudora. If you're not out, I'll have the sheriff evict you, and I'll make sure the press knows exactly why the great Mrs. Sterling is being kicked to the curb. Imagine the headlines, The Widow Who Never Was. She pointed to the door. Now get out of my house. My legs felt like jelly. I stood up from the white sofa, but the room tilted dangerously to the left. The shock of what Lorene had said, void, marriage, eviction, mistress, was hitting me harder than the desert heat. My voice cracked. I hated sounding weak in front of her, but I couldn't help it. I think I'm going to be sick. May I please use the restroom? Lorene rolled her eyes. She checked her watch again, clearly bored with destroying my life. Down the hall, second door on the left, she said, waving her hand dismissively. Make it quick. I have a yoga instructor coming at 4. I walked down the hallway. The floor was polished concrete, cool and smooth. The house was eerily quiet. No ticking clocks, no humming refrigerator, just the silence of money. I pushed open the heavy door to the bathroom. It was like a spa. Black marble countertops, a shower big enough for 4 people, and a mirror that stretched from wall to wall. I gripped the edge of the sink and looked at my reflection. The woman staring back at me looked 100 years old. My eyeliner was smudged. My skin looked gray under the harsh modern lighting. Lorene was right. I was an ornament. A cracked, dusty ornament that had just been thrown into the trash. Pull yourself together, Eudora, I whispered to the mirror. But the voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like a frightened child. I turned on the tap. The water came out cold. I splashed it on my face, trying to wash away the feeling of Lorraine's cigarette smoke. I reached for a hand towel folded neatly on the counter. That's when I saw it. Sitting on a small glass tray, next to a tube of expensive anti-aging cream, was a bright orange prescription bottle. It looked out of place in this perfect, curated bathroom. It was ugly, clinical. I wouldn't have looked twice at it, except for the color. Thaddeus had a row of bottles just like that on his nightstand in Newport. I picked it up. The label was crisp and new. Digoxin, 250 mcg. My heart skipped a beat. Digoxin. That was for heart failure. Thaddeus had been taking it for 10 years to manage his arrhythmia. It was a very specific dose for a very specific condition. I looked at the name on the bottle. It didn't say Thaddeus Sterling. It said John Vance. Vance, I muttered. That was Lorraine's last name. John must be her brother or a father. But then I looked at the date. Filled. November 30th. Yesterday. I stared at the bottle. Lorraine was hiking in the desert heat. She was smoking cigarettes. She was drinking bourbon at 3 in the afternoon. You don't do any of those things if you have heart failure severe enough to require digoxin. And if this John Vance was sick enough to need this medicine, where was he? I hadn't seen anyone else in the house. There were no medical equipment noises, no nurse. My thumb brushed against the cap. It wasn't child-proofed. Thaddeus hated child-proof caps because of his arthritis. He always requested the snap-off kind. This bottle had a snap-off cap. A strange, electric current shot through me. It was the instinct I had buried for 45 years, the gut feeling I used to ignore to keep the peace. Why is there heart medication here for a condition my husband had? Why was it refilled yesterday, 2 days after my husband supposedly died? I looked at the door. I could hear Lorraine in the living room, pouring herself another drink. The ice clinked against the glass. I made a decision. I slipped the orange bottle into the deep pocket of my blazer. If Lorraine was going to steal my house, I was going to steal her pill bottle. It was a small, petty act of rebellion, but it made me feel slightly less helpless. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and opened the bathroom door. I stepped back into the hallway, intending to march straight to the front door and leave. But as I passed the room next to the bathroom, a room with a closed door, I heard a sound. Cough. Cough. Hack. I froze. It wasn't a normal cough. It was a dry, rattling sound, followed by a sharp intake of breath. It was the sound of fluid in the lungs. It was the sound of a man trying to clear a throat that wouldn't clear. I knew that cough. I had listened to that cough every night for the last 5 years. I had fetched glasses of water for that cough. I had fluffed pillows for that cough. Thaddeus, I whispered, the name slipping out before I could stop it. The coughing stopped instantly. Silence rushed back into the hallway. Hey! Lorraine's voice boomed from the living room. I said, make it quick. What are you doing snooping around? I jumped away from the closed door. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would bruise my ribs. I was just leaving. I called out, my voice trembling. I walked fast. I walked past Lorraine, who was glaring at me from the sofa. I walked out the heavy front door. I walked down the porch steps. I got into my rental car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before I could get them into the ignition. As I reversed down the driveway, I looked up at the house one last time. I saw the blinds twitch in the window of the room where I heard the cough. I wasn't crazy. I knew that sound. Lorraine had said Thaddeus was dead. The doctors in Newport said Thaddeus was dead. I saw the ashes. But ashes don't cough. I gripped the steering wheel and sped down the private road. I wasn't going to the airport. I was going to find a place to park and watch, because suddenly, losing my house didn't matter. I was terrified I was losing my mind, or worse. I was about to find out that my husband wasn't just a liar, he was a monster. I drove until the modern adobe house was just a speck in my rearview mirror, but I didn't turn back toward the highway. Instead, I turned onto a dirt fire road that wound its way up the side of the canyon. Thaddeus always said I had no sense of direction, but he was wrong. I just never had a reason to navigate before. Today, I had the best reason in the world. I parked the rental car on a ridge overlooking the valley. From here, using the zoom lens on my phone and a cheap pair of binoculars I had bought at a gas station on the way up, I had a clear view of Lorraine's compound. The sun began to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. The desert air, which had been so hot just an hour ago, turned bitingly cold. I turned off the engine to save gas. I sat there in the deepening dark, wrapped in my wool blazer, eating a pack of stale crackers I found in my purse. I felt ridiculous. I was a 72-year-old woman, a deaconess at the First Presbyterian Church, staking out a house like a character in a cheap detective novel. My back was aching, my feet were cold, and I needed to use the restroom again. But every time I thought about leaving, I touched the orange pill bottle in my pocket. Digoxin. I pulled out my phone. I had one contact who might help me, but I had to be careful. Arthur was our family lawyer, but he was also Thaddeus's golf partner for 20 years. I dialed. He answered on the second ring. Eudora? Arthur's voice was thick with sleep. It's nearly midnight here in Newport. Is everything all right? Is it Caspian? Caspian is fine, Arthur, I said, keeping my voice low. I need you to look something up for me. Right now. Eudora, can't this wait until morning? You should be resting. I am done resting, I snapped. The sharpness in my voice surprised both of us. I need you to run a background check. A deep one. I need to know everything about a woman named Lorraine Vance living in Sedona, Arizona. And I need to know if there is a man associated with her named John Vance. There was a long pause on the line. Vance? I don't know that name. Eudora, what is going on? Caspian said you went to a spa. Just do it, Arthur. Please. For the 40 years of Christmas dinners I hosted for you, find out who John Vance is, and call me the second you know. I hung up before he could ask any more questions. I put the phone down and raised the binoculars. The house below was glowing like a spaceship in the dark desert. Lights flickered on in the kitchen, then the living room. I saw Lorraine's silhouette moving around. She was pacing. She looked agitated. She was on the phone, gesturing wildly. Was she calling Caspian? Was she calling the police? I waited. 1 hour passed, then 2. My legs were cramping, and the cold was seeping into my bones. I started to doubt myself. Maybe the cough was just the plumbing rattling. Maybe the pill bottle really was for her brother. Maybe I was just a grieving old woman, losing her mind in the desert. I reached for the key to start the car and give up. Then, the back patio door opened. I froze. A flood of yellow light spilled onto the stone terrace. Lorraine stepped out. She wasn't alone. She was pushing a wheelchair. I pressed the binoculars against my glasses so hard it hurt. The figure in the wheelchair was slumped over, wearing a heavy blanket and a wide-brimmed sun hat, even though it was pitch black outside. Lorraine parked the chair near the edge of the patio, facing the canyon. She leaned down, said something to the person, and then walked back inside, leaving the sliding door open a crack. The figure in the chair moved. A hand emerged from under the blanket. It was a man's hand. Even from this distance, I could see the tremor. It was a distinctive, rhythmic shaking of the left hand. Thaddeus had developed that tremor 5 years ago after his mini-stroke. He was self-conscious about it. He used to hide his hand in his pocket during photos. The man reached into his robe. He pulled out a long, dark object. A cigar. My breath caught in my throat. Thaddeus strictly forbade smoking. He claimed it was a filthy habit that ruined the curtains, but he had one exception, one singular vice. Every year, on November 14th, his birthday, he would go out to the garden alone and smoke one Monte Cristo cigar. He called it his victory lap for surviving another year. I glanced at the date on my car's dashboard. November 14. Today would have been Thaddeus's 73rd birthday. The man in the wheelchair struck a match. The flame flared up, illuminating the lower half of his face for a split second before he sucked the flame into the cigar. I saw the jawline. I saw the gray stubble. I dropped the binoculars into my lap. The world didn't spin. It didn't blur. Instead, everything suddenly snapped into crystal clear focus. The receipt, the digoxin, the cough, the tremor, the date. It wasn't a brother. It wasn't a secret charity case. The man sitting on that patio, smoking a victory cigar while I sat freezing in a rental car mourning his death, was my husband. Thaddeus wasn't dead. He was retired. And he had killed Eudora Sterling to do it. My phone buzzed against my leg, making me jump. It was Arthur. I stared at the screen, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Down below, the man my husband exhaled a plume of smoke into the night air. I answered the phone. Eudora. Arthur's voice was tight, breathless. I found them. I don't know what you've stumbled into, but you need to come home. Now. Tell me, I whispered, not taking my eyes off the glowing tip of the cigar in the darkness below. John Vance isn't a real person, Eudora. He's a ghost identity created 3 years ago. Social security number belongs to a deceased child from 1950. But here's the kicker. The medical records attached to the name match Thaddeus perfectly. Same blood type, same heart condition, same prescriptions. I know, I said. He's staring at me right now, Arthur. Well, he's staring at the canyon, but he's alive. What? Arthur shouted. Thaddeus? But the cremation, the coroner's report. I saw the death certificate. Who signed it, Arthur? Dr. Halloway, the county coroner. Why? Halloway, I repeated, the man whose mortgage Thaddeus paid off last year, the man Thaddeus took fishing every summer. Arthur went silent. The realization was hitting him too. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking together with a sickening sound. The closed casket, the rushed cremation, the insistence on a private service. He's alive, Arthur said, his voice hollow. My God, Eudora, listen to me carefully. You are in danger. If he faked his death, this is felony fraud, insurance fraud, identity theft, if they know you're there. They don't know, I said. They think I'm a helpless old woman who ran away crying. Eudora, the SEC. Arthur cut in. That's the other thing. I made some calls to New York. There's a sealed indictment coming down next week against Sterling Real Estate. Massive embezzlement charges. Ponzi scheme allegations. If Thaddeus were alive, he'd be looking at 20 years in federal prison. I looked down at the patio. The smoke swirled around the wheelchair. So, he ran, I said. He faked his death to escape the feds. He cashed out his life insurance to fund his retirement, and he left me to hold the bag. Yes, Arthur said. Eudora, come home. We'll go to the FBI together. Don't confront him. Wait, I said. A new thought struck me, cold and sharp. The insurance. The policy hasn't paid out yet. No, it's still in processing. $10 million. You're the beneficiary, but the funds are frozen until the death certificate is fully verified. That usually takes a few weeks. But I'm not the beneficiary, I said, remembering Lorraine's cruel smile. The marriage certificate. If our marriage is void, Lorraine gets it. Technically, yes, Arthur admitted, but she needs you to step aside. She needs you to not contest the will. She needs you to play the part of the grieving widow so the insurance company doesn't get suspicious. My phone beeped. A new call coming in. Caspian. Hold on, Arthur, I said. I clicked over to my son. Mom, Caspian sounded frantic. Where are you? I called the spa, and they said you never checked in. I've been worried sick. I'm fine, Caspian, I said calmly. I took a drive. A drive? To where? Mom, listen, the insurance adjuster called. They need one more signature from you to release the funds. They're rushing it through. I need you to come back to Newport tomorrow to sign the affidavit confirming Dad's passing. My grip on the phone tightened. Confirming his passing, I repeated. Yes. Just a formality. Once you sign, the money is released. It will secure the estate. It will secure my future. Please, Mom. Caspian, I asked softly. Did you know? Know what? About Lorraine? About Arizona? There was a hesitation. A split second of silence that told me everything. Mom, look. Dad had a complicated life. We can talk about it when you get home. Just come home and sign the papers. Don't make this harder than it has to be. He knew. My own son knew. Maybe he didn't know Thaddeus was alive, or maybe he did, but he knew about the other woman. He knew I was being played, and he didn't care. He just wanted the $10 million to save the company. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from rage. Pure, hot, purifying rage. I'll be there, Caspian. I lied. I'll sign whatever needs to be signed. I hung up on my son. I switched back to Arthur. Eudora? I'm not coming home, Arthur, I said, and I'm not going to the FBI. Not yet. What are you going to do? I watched Thaddeus stub out his cigar. He looked so smug. So safe. He thought he had won. He thought Eudora Sterling was just a soft, stupid old woman who would fade into the wallpaper. I'm going to finish the funeral, I said. Eudora, don't do anything rash, Arthur pleaded. I have the pill bottle, Arthur. I have the receipt. I have the proof. But if I go to the police now, he might run again. He has money. He has fake passports. I need to trap him. How? He needs my signature to get the money. He needs me to validate his death. So I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. I hung up the phone. I started the car engine. I wasn't going to run. I was going back into the lion's den. But this time, I wasn't walking in as a sheep. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The tears were gone. My eyes were dry. Happy birthday, Thaddeus, I whispered. I put the car in gear and drove slowly back down the mountain, toward the house that held my dead husband and my stolen life. I didn't sleep. I spent the night in the car, watching the sunrise bleed over the red rocks. I fixed my makeup in the rearview mirror, but I didn't try to hide the dark circles under my eyes. In fact, I made them look worse. I needed to look broken. I needed to look like a woman who had spent the night crying and had finally accepted her defeat. At 9 a.m. sharp, I drove back up the paved driveway. The silver Land Rover was still there. The house looked quiet, serene, and expensive, a fortress built on lies. I walked up to the heavy wooden door and knocked. My hand was steady this time. Lorraine answered. She was wearing a white silk robe and holding a cup of coffee. She looked fresh, rested, and annoyed to see me. I thought I told you to be gone by Monday, she said, blocking the doorway. I have nowhere to go, I said, letting my voice tremble just enough. And Caspian called me. He said you need my signature for the insurance. Lorraine's eyes narrowed. She studied my face, looking for a fight. She saw only a tired, slumped old woman in a wrinkled blazer. She smirked. Well, at least you're practical, she said, stepping aside. Come in. We were just having breakfast. I walked into the cool, expansive living room. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee hung in the air. It was nauseatingly normal. Teddy, Lorraine called out, her voice echoing off the glass walls. We have a guest. The widow is back. The sound of an electric motor whirred from the hallway. I stood in the center of the room, clutching my handbag with both hands. I forced myself to breathe. In, out, don't scream, don't attack. The wheelchair rolled into the room. Thaddeus. Seeing him from the ridge was one thing. Seeing him 5 feet away was another. He looked good. His skin was tanned. He had lost weight. The gray pallor of the sick man in the hospital bed was gone. He was wearing a crisp polo shirt and linen shorts. He looked at me with the same expression he used to wear during board meetings, calm, detached, and slightly bored. Hello, Eudora, he said. The sound of his voice, the voice I had mourned, the voice I had prayed to hear one last time, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. You're alive, I whispered. Obviously, he said, reaching for a piece of toast on the table. Don't be dramatic, Eudora. It doesn't suit you. Dramatic? I stared at him. I buried you, Thaddeus. I picked out your casket. I cried over your ashes. Those were wood chips and cement dust. Lorraine interjected, leaning against the counter. Cost us $5,000 to bribe the crematorium guy. Worth every penny. Thaddeus waved a hand at her to be quiet. He wheeled himself closer to me. It was necessary, Eudora. The SEC was circling. The indictment is coming down next week. If I had stayed, I would have died in a federal prison cell. Do you want that? Do you want your husband to rot in jail? So, you killed yourself to save yourself, I said. I retired, he corrected. I took the exit ramp, and I secured the assets. Or, I'm trying to. He gestured to a stack of papers on the coffee table. The life insurance policy, $10 million. It's the only clean money left. Lorraine can't claim it because she's not the beneficiary of record you are. But once the money hits your account, you transfer it to the shell company in the Caymans, and we all live happily ever after. And what happens to me? I asked. Lorraine said the house is hers. She said, I have nothing. Thaddeus sighed, looking disappointed. Lorraine can be harsh, but she's right legally. However, I'm not a monster, Eudora. If you sign the papers and make the transfer, we'll set you up with a stipend. $5,000 a month. You can get a nice little condo in Florida. You like humidity, don't you? $5,000 a month. After 45 years of marriage. After raising his son. After nursing him through his sickness. And if I don't sign? I asked. Thaddeus's face hardened. The charm evaporated. Then you get nothing. Lorraine evicts you. The feds seize the Newport house anyway when the indictment hits. You'll be homeless and penniless. And I'll still be here, enjoying the sunshine, because nobody knows I'm alive except you. And who is going to believe a senile, grief-stricken old woman? He picked up a heavy, expensive fountain pen, the one I gave him for Christmas 10 years ago, and held it out to me. Be smart, Eudora. Be the good wife one last time. Sign the release form so the insurance company pays out, then go to Florida and fade away. I looked at the pen. I looked at Lorraine, who was smiling like a cat with a canary. I looked at Thaddeus, the man I had loved, who was looking at me like I was a bad investment he was finally liquidating. I reached out and took the pen. Thaddeus smiled. Good girl. I held the pen over the papers. My hand started to shake. Come on, Lorraine snapped. Just sign it so we can get on with our day. I stopped. I looked up. I can't sign these, I said softly. Why not? Thaddeus demanded, his patience snapping. I dropped the pen onto the table. It clattered loudly against the glass. Because, I said, my voice finding its steel. I didn't bring the insurance release forms, Thaddeus. Thaddeus frowned. What are you talking about? Caspian said you were bringing them. I reached into my handbag. Thaddeus flinched, perhaps thinking I had a gun. But I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out the orange pill bottle. I set it on the table. Next to it, I placed the crumpled thermal receipt. Thaddeus stared at the bottle. His face went pale beneath his tan. I didn't call the insurance company, Thaddeus, I said, standing taller than I had in years. And I didn't call Caspian. Who did you call? Lorraine asked, stepping forward, her voice rising in panic. I looked Thaddeus dead in the eye. I called the sheriff, I said. Thaddeus laughed nervously. You're bluffing. You wouldn't turn me in. You love me. I loved my husband, I said coldly, but my husband died 3 days ago. You're just a thief who stole his face. Eudora, don't be stupid, Thaddeus hissed, wheeling back. If you call the police, I go to prison, but you lose everything too? I already lost everything, I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. You took my life! You took my dignity! You took my memories! I have nothing left to lose, Thaddeus. But you? I pointed out the massive window toward the long, winding driveway. You have everything to lose. In the distance, barely audible at first, but growing louder by the second, was the wail of sirens. Thaddeus spun his wheelchair around to look out the window. 2 police cruisers were kicking up dust on the private road, lights flashing red and blue against the desert sky. No, he gasped. No, no, no. And Thaddeus? I added, delivering the final blow. I didn't just call the local police for insurance fraud. I called Agent Miller at the SEC. I told him you were ready to testify. Thaddeus turned to look at me, his eyes wide with pure terror. The arrogance was gone. The CEO was gone. He was just a frightened old man in a wheelchair. You wouldn't, he stammered. I did, I said, smoothing my blazer. You wanted me to handle the business, Thaddeus. I just closed the deal. The sirens were deafening now. They filled the canyon, bouncing off the red rocks until the whole world sounded like an alarm. Inside the house, panic exploded. Do something! Lorraine screamed at Thaddeus. She wasn't the cool, arrogant woman anymore. She was frantic. She ran to the wall safe and started shoving cash and passports into a designer bag. Thaddeus, the man who had been paralyzed in a wheelchair a moment ago, scrambled to his feet. It was a miracle of adrenaline. He stood up, shaky but mobile, and stumbled toward the back door. The trail! He yelled. We can take the trail to the Jeep! He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Lorraine. He was running for his own skin. But he was 73 years old, and he had spent the last 3 days sitting in a chair smoking cigars and drinking scotch. He took 2 steps toward the patio door, and his legs gave out. He crashed to the floor, knocking over a vase of desert flowers. I didn't move. I stood by the coffee table, my hand resting on the Bible receipt. I felt strangely calm, like I was watching a movie I had already seen the ending to. It's too late, Thaddeus, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the chaos. The front door burst open. "Police! Hands in the air!" Uniformed officers swarmed into the living room, their boots heavy on the polished concrete. Dust from the outside swirled in with them. Lorraine dropped her bag. She threw her hands up instantly. "He forced me!" she screamed, pointing at Thaddeus on the floor. "I didn't know. He told me he was divorced. He told me the money was legal." I watched her turn on him, the love of his life, the woman he built a castle for. It took less than 10 seconds for her to sell him out. 2 officers hauled Thaddeus up from the floor. He looked pathetic. His polo shirt was twisted, his hair was a mess, and his face was gray with shock. "There's been a mistake," Thaddeus sputtered as they twisted his arms behind his back. "I am a sick man. I have heart failure. You can't do this." "You looked pretty healthy running for that door, sir," one of the officers said, snapping the handcuffs shut. Click, click. That sound. The sound of steel locking on bone. It was the sound of my marriage officially ending. An older man in a suit walked in behind the uniforms. He flashed a badge. It wasn't a sheriff's badge. It was federal. "Mrs. Sterling?" he asked, looking at me. "I am Eudora Sterling," I said. I paused, then corrected myself. "Actually, just Eudora. It seems I never was a Sterling." The agent nodded. He looked at the receipt and the pill bottle on the table. "Your lawyer, Arthur, called us," the agent said. "He sent over the files on the shell companies. We've been trying to pin those assets down for 5 years. We didn't know he was funneling it to Arizona." Thaddeus was being dragged toward the door. He dug his heels in, trying to stop. He looked back at me. His eyes were wide, pleading. "Eudora," he cried out. Tell them I was confused. Tell them I have dementia. I can fix this. We can make a deal." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had washed clothes for, cooked for, and prayed for. I looked for any spark of love left in my heart. I found nothing, just dust. "I don't know who you are," I said clearly. "My husband died 3 days ago. You're just a ghost." The officers shoved him through the door. I watched him disappear into the back of a squad car. Lorraine was led out next, weeping about her reputation. The house fell silent again. "You'll need to come down to the station to give a formal statement," the agent said gently. "And Mrs. Eudora, regarding the assets." "Yes?" "Because you provided the physical evidence, the receipt, the location, the identity you qualify for the SEC whistleblower program. The assets we are seizing from this estate are in the millions. The standard reward is 10 to 30%. I did the math in my head. It wasn't the 10 million from the insurance fraud. It was clean money, honest money, my money." "Thank you," I said. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew who it was before I looked. Caspian. I stared at the screen. He was calling to see if I had signed the papers. He was calling to save the company. He was calling to save himself. I answered. "Mom?" He sounded breathless. "Did you do it? Is the money released?" "The money is seized, Caspian," I said. "What? What are you talking about?" "Your father is in custody. Lorraine is in custody. The feds are seizing the Newport house, the accounts, and the business." There was a silence so profound on the other end, I thought the line had gone dead. Then, a strangled sound. "Mom! You called the police? You destroyed us. You destroyed everything." "No, Caspian," I said, my voice steady and strong. "I saved myself. You knew about her. You knew about the lies. You were happy to let me be a penniless widow as long as you got your inheritance. Mom, please, I have debts." "Then I suggest you get a job," I said. "I hear the landscaping business is hiring. You always liked the garden." "Mom, don't call me for money, Caspian, and don't call me Mom for a while. I need a break from the Sterlings." I hung up. Then I turned the phone off. I walked out of the house. I didn't look back at the adobe walls or the infinity pool. I walked to my rental car, sat in the driver's seat, and checked my reflection. I didn't look like an old woman anymore. I looked like a survivor. The terminal was busy. I walked up to the international counter. I placed my passport on the desk. "Destination?" the agent asked. I thought about Newport, the rain, the gray ocean, the empty lying house. I thought about Thaddeus sitting in a cell, blaming everyone but himself. I looked at the departure board. Paris, I said. The agent typed on her keyboard. One way or round trip? I smiled, a real smile, one that reached my eyes. One way, I said, and upgrade me to first class. I can afford it. As I walked toward the security gate, I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the thermal receipt, the little piece of paper that had started it all. I found a trash can. I held the receipt over it. Thaddeus had used money to build a cage. I used the truth to buy my wings. I dropped the receipt. It fluttered down into the darkness. I turned around and walked through the gate, not as a grandmother, not as a wife, but as Eudora. And for the first time in 45 years, I didn't know what was going to happen next. And it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. Financial abuse and fraud are crimes, even in families. If you see a receipt that doesn't make sense, ask questions. They say the truth will set you free, but sometimes you have to drag the truth kicking and screaming into the light first. I lost a husband, but I found myself. And honestly, it was the best trade I ever made. Do you think Eudora was too harsh on her son, or did Caspian get what he deserved? Let me know in the comments. And if you would have called the feds on Thaddeus, hit that like button. Don't let the liars win.